Hello there, my name is David Pustansky and welcome to the Extreme Improv Podcast Skills Show. This is a mini episode within the Extreme Improv Podcast Network where I will talk about some improv skills, so it'll be like a tutorial episode. So if you are an improviser or an actor, or if you're just someone that wants to get into doing a bit of improv or learning some improv skills, perhaps to use and apply elsewhere, then these episodes of the Extreme Improv Skills Show hopefully will be useful to you. Before we get going on the tutorial part of today's episode, I just want to briefly explain a little bit about our different podcasts, just because this is episode 1 of the Skills Show. So if I've got you listening to this, you may not understand how it fits into the rest of the podcast we have available. So for over a year now, there has been the Extreme Improv podcast, and it's had a little bit of variation of what the episodes are like. So starting with 2020, I decided to classify the episodes into 3 different ways. So you have the Extreme Improv Radio Rumble, which is like a panel show, a comedy show, so it's like listening to an audio improv show. We have the Extreme Improv Chat Show, where I, or other people I guess, but so far it's just me, will interview people who are improvisers, comedians, actors, and some other things along the way, and just talk about improv, comedy, and anything else that comes up that's to do with their interest, pop culture, or what have you. And then there's this show, which is the Extreme Improv Podcast Skills Show. And the Skills Show are mini episodes which will talk over various improv skills. I will also give the quick mention, just whilst I have you listening, that the Extreme Improv Podcast Network, starting at the beginning of 2020, has several other shows starting. So as well as the Extreme Improv Podcast Radio Rumble, Skills Show and Chat Show, we will have the Extreme Improv Book Club, which isn't a podcast that just talks about books. This will be starting very soon, and it will be like an audiobook experience. So you will be reading some classic books and putting a little bit of an extreme improv spin on the proceedings. We'll also have other podcasts which aren't strictly improv related, but I'm sure lots of people out there will enjoy them, and there's a lot of crossover in people's interests. So do check out the Mega Movie podcast, where I'll be talking about old and current movies, films and actors and trivia and all this kind of stuff. I will also be talking on the Games Monster podcast, which is a podcast about video games, and the Super Kick Mania Pro Wrestling podcast. So if you're a fan of pro wrestling, check that out. These are all part of the Extreme Improv Podcast Network. All of them can be subscribed to individually. However, if you are interested just in the improv side of things, then you can subscribe simply to the Extreme Improv Podcast, and you will get the Skills Show, the Chat Show, and Radio Rumble all from the one feed. If you don't want all 3, then simply subscribe to Extreme Improv Radio Rumble, Extreme Improv Podcast Skills Show, or Extreme Improv Podcast Chat Show, because they will each have their own separate feeds. So, now that explanation is all out of the way, let's get on to the topic of this debut episode. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the short-form improv game known as Styles Clash, which is a game that we play in Extreme Improv, and it is a variation on film and theatre styles, or film styles, or film, theatre and television styles. And there are other related short-form improv games, such as Emotion Option, and maybe 1 or 2 other names you've come across it under. But let me explain the basic premise, and then I will explain some tips. So when we play a Styles Clash, or film and theatre styles, 2, 3, 4 performers will be on the stage, and they will perform a scene based on an audience suggestion. And it could be that you ask the audience for a scenario, such as a place of work. It could be that you ask the audience for a precious object or something to celebrate or what have you. And the performers in the scene will just perform the scene as a straightforward improv scene. And then as they're performing along the way, the host, the MC, or perhaps sometimes one of the performers themselves will call out freeze. And once freeze has been called, the audience usually, although it can sometimes be self-generated, from the cast, that is, the audience will be asked for a suggestion of a different style to continue playing the game in. Now, usually this is done in short form shows as a film, theatre and television styles. Excuse me. You also have it so that it might be an emotion option game where instead of asking the audience for a different film, theatre or television style, you'll ask for a different emotion. When we play it as a styles clash in Extreme Improv, we will ask for film, theatre, television styles, emotions, and then lots of other random things such as an animal or a time period. And then the idea is, with whatever suggestion you have received from the audience, the actors will continue the story in that style. Now, there is another short form improv game which is often called Hollywood Director, where when you get a new style, you go back to the beginning and recreate the scene you've just done in a different style. But in a styles clash, emotion option or film, television, theatre styles, you keep the story going. So the first thing, just to break down the various aspects of how to successfully perform this scene. And it's something important I actually just want to point out is that, you know, in improv, there isn't necessarily a right or wrong. You can do everything, but it's a little bit of a myth, because whilst you can do anything, there are also, the way I phrase it is that there are choices you can make which are either more or less successful. So the purpose of this podcast is to give you a little bit of my insight of what works for me, may not work for you, and hopefully it will help guide you to have some ideas of how to make more or less successful choices. So say you're doing a scene, and we'll say it's set at a hospital. That's a common scene type that comes up. You've got a scene that's set in a hospital, and that isn't the genre, that isn't the style, that is the scenario. You're performing a scene set in a hospital. It could be that someone's been shot and they need treatment. It could be that someone's got gangrene and they're going to have their leg cut off, and or anything else. Someone's having a baby. There's an unlimited number of options of what the scenario could be. And then the audience might say, we want to see this continued as if it's an action film. So what do? If you think that the initial scene is set in a hospital and then suddenly it's got to continue as if it's an action film, what you want to do is you want to use conventions of action films. And what do I mean by conventions? I mean the things that typically or stereotypically will come up in an action film, which might be that characters have got guns, that someone needs rescuing, that there's a ransom situation, that there's a bomb that needs to be deactivated, that you're going to run around, that it might even be that there's a certain type of music if you've got musical accompaniment, or if not, then people can do it vocally. Just jumping about, lots of excitement and action. Catchphrases, if you look at action films with Sylvester Stallone or Arnold Schwarzenegger or like The Matrix or whatever, then there might be certain things that are typical to that type of film, and you want to try and include them. Now, for a lot of improvisers that aren't that experienced, a trap they fall into is that they just drop the original scenario and just start performing The Matrix on stage. And that's not what you need to do. You must never forget that the original scenario has to be continued. So if you've got a scene set in a hospital and then you're continuing it as an action film, then it could be that characters like, we've got 5 minutes until this patient's heart explodes, and we've got to reroute their veins as if you're deactivating a bomb. Or it could be that a woman's pregnant and suddenly it's an action film and it's like, I'm kidnapping this baby, it's not really mine, and you can get some humour out of the fact that if it's inside the woman, then unless it's a surrogate pregnancy, overthinking things here, then of course the baby is hers. But you want to put on some of the tropes, some of the stereotypical things that you find within the genre, in this example being an action film, and apply it to the scenario that you've got. I'll give a few more examples. So let's say the next genre you throw in there could be Shakespeare. So that's a theatre style. And once again, we'll say that we're at a hospital. So you don't want to suddenly stand there and think, oh, right, now I've got to do Shakespeare and say, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo, and just quote Shakespeare full, wholesale, because now you're just doing something Shakespeare. What you want to do is take the style of language and the conventions of Shakespeare theatre and apply them to the scenario that we're talking about here, which is being set at a hospital. So let's have a think. So instead of saying Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo, you could have a character set in a hospital, say, I don't know, this is going to sound a bit dark, but heart transplant, wherefore art thou heart transplant? A heart, my kingdom for a heart, if your character needs a heart transplant. And that would, just along the way you can be using the these and the thous and the forsooths and all of the things that you stereotypically will get in a Shakespeare play. Try to speak certain things in verse, have rhyming couplets. Instead of saying doctor, then you might call them, will you do the operation? Will thou do the operation, my liege? And stuff like this. And so it starts to, and you could say, well, that I be 32 years young, I have lived an old life, because obviously back in the Elizabethan times, living into your 30s or 40s was an old age. So you can start applying some of these things to the scenario that you've got. Another one that commonly comes up is musical. So your audience, they will throw out to you that they want you to do a musical. And in a later episode of the Extreme Improv Skills Show, we will talk specifically about musical improv. And we might even have some guests to talk about that who perhaps are a little bit more of an authority on it than me. However, the thing I'd say for performing film and theatre styles or a styles clash, if you have to do a musical, is one, just don't rush into it, because look how many performers are on stage. If everyone tries to sing at once, then you're all going to come in with different tunes, different rhythms, and you're all going to fumble over each other. So, and this is something that applies to anything you do in improv. Don't rush, take your time. See who else is in your scene with you, get some eye contact going, and one person take the lead, take the initiative, or if someone else is going to take the initiative, then concede that, okay, they've got the ball, and I will take it when it's passed to me or when the opportunity comes up. And then just sing something that relates to what you're doing. Again, you probably want to make up a song rather than take a well-known song, because unless you're an incredible singer, if you're going to sing a really well-known song, one, let's hope you know all the lyrics, because if you get started and then run out, then you're not really delivering your promise to make it a musical, you're just doing a tiny snippet. And you could change the lyrics of a well-known song, so if there's something that fits the scenario of a hospital. I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head. I'm not fully in improv mode, so you have to forgive me that I don't have one to immediately launch into. So I suppose, okay, so Pink Floyd, Another Brick in the Wall, is famous lyrics, I don't need no education. And if you've got a character that's unwell in the hospital, it could be, I don't need no constipation. And then they need a laxative or something, Hey, doctor, leave that kid alone. I don't know, that sounds a bit dodgy unless they're a paediatrician, which isn't anything dodgy, look it up. But anyway, what I would say more than that is try to sing something original. Audiences are impressed if you can rhyme. I know a lot of musical improv out there doesn't rhyme. My preference, which might be controversial to people out there that don't follow this, is my preference is that songs in improv should rhyme if you can make them rhyme. You don't have to rhyme tons, but once again, for me, fulfilling the promise of we're emulating a musical, most songs do rhyme. So, if you can rhyme, great, but again, you don't have to. But that's a whole other skill set, which we'll get onto another time. And if the more that can join in, so if you get like a nice easy set of lyrics that perhaps repeat, then you can have other characters and other actors join in, or you can hand over singing to someone else so that it becomes a group number or a duet or whatever you have. But make sure you're continuing to push the story forward. I recently did a video for the Improv Boost, which, if you've not seen them on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, don't know why I said Twitter that way, then you should check them out. They do a lot to share and spread a lot of improv like tutorials and goodness out there. So that's the plug. Big up to David who runs that. Not to myself, I'm another David, a couple of Davids here in the improv world. But I did a video for them, and I was talking about the importance of moving this story on. So if you've got a scene set in a hospital and you've got gangrene and your leg needs to be cut off, then cut the leg off. Don't make it by the time that the short form scene has ended that, are you going to cut my leg off? Well, I need to find the tools. Oh, well, I need to find some anaesthetic. And by the end of it, it's not happened. Have it so the leg is cut off, then make it so that it's bleeding out and you can't stop the bleeding, and then make it so that you now need to get a peg leg, or you need to get a prosthetic leg, or you decide that my leg has been cut off, I want to have a leg, so I'm going to steal the nurse's leg, or something like this, or now I'm going to use a wheelchair, or whatever else. No offence to anyone out there who may be an amputee or doesn't have a leg. I'm just using this as an example. I'm not trying to make light of it, I promise you. And so, yeah, always move the story on. I'll give another couple of examples. Very, very quick. I'll rattle through these now. You might get a horror film. So if you get a horror film, then you might have characters doing sinister laughs. You might want to throw in some catchphrases of, do you want to play a game? Or, Chucky wants to watch the 9 o'clock news, which is from Child's Play. That's a random catchphrase. I'm not even sure if it is a catchphrase, it's a random quote. And you want to have things that, once again, relate to that genre. You'll probably, if you're in a hospital, lots of characters have got scalpels and, like, blades and knives and things. So you can play that into it, and you can have revelations of 10 years ago on this very night when this person died, their soul left their body and it now possessed this scalpel, or whatever. So you want to, again, use the conventions of the genre, and you want to combine it with the things that fit your scenario. Last example I'll give here is, say you get something, well, actually I'll give a couple more, but I'll give a couple of more random ones. Say that you get that you've got to be a cartoon or an anime or a Pixar movie or something like this. You probably want to find the cartoon voices. You can dive onto Goofy and be like, "Gosh, well, what you gonna do?" And that's not a very good Goofy voice, but you get my idea. So just take the character you're playing and add a cartoon voice to it. Have some more animated body language, and that way you can portray to your audience, who are the important people in the room, for what you're doing, that they understand what you're doing, that they get the references, that they get the jokes, that they are on board with what you're doing, and so that they understand. And I will just speak a tiny bit more on that. So how important is the audience? Hugely. They're the people you're performing for. It can be that you do things for your own benefit, but you don't want to do in-jokes. You don't want to do things that are too obscure. And so that's why I say about the conventions. If you do things that are nice and obvious, then the audience will understand. If you've got science fiction and you do something that is an obvious reference to the Terminator or Alien or the Matrix, then the audience will know it. But if you do something because you saw some random video or some other improv show or something that people won't know in a widespread way, then you might start to lose your audience. And one of the major things I'm going to promote across these skill shows podcasts is make sure you keep your audience happy, because they'll keep you in business. They'll keep you doing more shows and people requesting to see you and hiring you and putting you in shows and everything else. Last example I'll give for this is a film noir. Now, a film noir is an interesting deal. I might even look this up. Let me just bring this up. If I can quickly bring up something about what is film noir as a definition, then I will tell you, because a lot of you listening will think you know what film noir is. But, okay, what I'll say is the challenge for you listening at home: name 10 film noir films. 10 examples of film noir. Because in my observation, it's something that mostly is in people's consciousness because of improv shows. If you've got an audience at an improv show, then they might be people that have seen Whose Line's It Anyway or other improv shows, and very inevitably during a game of film and theatre styles, the audience or the host would call out film noir. And what that means for an improviser to do is the improviser will usually put on an American accent, maybe sometimes French, and they will talk directly to the audience as if they're thinking out loud, and the other characters won't be able to hear it. They'll smoke imaginary cigarettes, and when they speak to the audience, they'll say something like, "I wanted to ask him why he was here." Then they'll turn back to the other character and say, "Why are you here?" And so it's got that kind of rhythm. That's a convention that you can use, and that's what your audience will be expecting. However, is that fully accurate or full representation of film noir? No, not really. Okay, as I've been saying this, probably losing my train of thought a little bit, I did actually go onto Wikipedia and look up film noir, and I'll read to you what it says here. Film noir is a cinematic term used primarily to describe stylish Hollywood crime dramas, particularly those that emphasize cynical attitudes and sexual motivations. The 1940s and 1950s are generally regarded as the classic period of American film noir. Film noir of this era is associated with low-key black and white visual style that has its roots in German expressionist cinematography. Many of the prototypical stories and much of the attitude of classic noir derive from the hard-boiled school of crime fiction that emerged in the United States during the Great Depression. So yeah, I come back to my question. Can you name 10 examples of film noir movies? And the point is, you can't. So why does the audience always ask for film noir? Because they've seen Whose Line's It Anyway, and they know this is a fun one to ask for. So the reason I give that example is because as an improviser, what can you do to prepare if you're going to be in a show that you might be playing film and theatre styles or our variation of styles clash in? You should know your genres. And you don't need to watch tons of films, you just need to know a few stereotypical conventions to be able to satisfy the needs of the audience. Now, if you really know your film and television styles and references and theatre styles, then you can put in a lot more intricate references. You can put in, you can call back to lots of different films and theatre productions, and you'll be able to find a lot more that you can play with. And I'll just give the example. So if you're doing a musical and your scene was set at a vet's, then you'd be able to do something about cats in there, I suppose. But if you didn't know the musical Cats, you wouldn't be able to do that reference. So the more specific references you have, then you can use them. I've spoken mostly about film and a couple of theatre styles here, but of course I said there can be television styles. And also, I said about our variation, which is a styles clash. So, for example, on a styles clash, we may ask for a type of animal. And then you continue the scene as that type of animal. And again, if you're given cats, once again, you're still in the hospital, but you'll probably be licking your wounds. Or we need to take a stool sample, let's check the kitty litter. You might have a time period. So can we have a suggestion of a time period? Continue it as if it's the 1960s. So you then want to put in references to hippies and Carry-On films and being post-war, and we've got colour televisions now and things like this. But again, tying it into your original scenario, which in the example we've spoken about today is being at a hospital. So, is there anything else I really want to cover? Because I said this would be a mini episode and it's already approaching the 25-minute mark, which is probably a little bit on the long side for what I want these episodes to be, but we'll see. Once you get a flow going, I guess they may vary in length. So I may begin to wrap this one up here. So if you're going to do film and theatre styles clash, then just get a sense of the various things that may come up. Have a little bit of an idea of what things relate to each genre, and then you'll be able to call back on them. Now, something which is important, I think, as a general thing for people, is that this isn't pre-planning. This isn't not improvising. You're going to be improvising, but just as I'm speaking out loud, I am improvising right now as I speak, but it's not pre-planned because I've learned the English language. I learned the English language so that I can use the English language. And if you're going to do most things in improv, if you learn something, if you learn a format, if you learn a different film, television, theatre style, or whatever, then you can use that. So, just learning what the different emotions are if you do the emotion option version of this, which also comes up in a styles clash. Everyone knows what it means to be happy, everyone, or hopefully. If you don't, then there's organisations out there that will help you. And if not, then come join and watch an improv show and join an improv show, because it's really good for you. So good for mental health, but that will be something we speak about on another episode. But if you do emotion option version and you get a random emotion that you're not quite sure what it means, like ambivalence, which is where you're kind of feeling two emotions, split feelings about something, just make sure you know what that word means and how you could demonstrate it. You might also get the emotion hangry, which, if you don't know what hangry is, it's when you feel quite angry and you're in a grumpy mood because you're hungry. So just know how to incorporate that into the scene. And once again, just to give the example, if you're in a hospital, then you might be hangry, but you're really angry because the hospital food is terrible. So there you go. This was the very first episode of the Extreme Improv podcast Skills Show. I'd love some feedback on this or any of our other current podcasts or endeavours. We've got lots and lots of live shows coming up. By the time you're listening to this week, then we should have lots of announcements of the live shows we've got coming up in London and Aylesbury and Manchester and Brighton and so many other places. We'll also have our Jet Lagged and Loving It travel vlog series, which is available on our YouTube and Facebook pages. We're also on Instagram and Twitter. Just search Extreme Improv on any of the social media platforms or podcast platforms, and you will find one of the many shows, live shows, video programs, or podcasts that we do. All of these social media links can be found from our website, www.extremeimprov.co.uk. And my name is David Pustansky. You can follow me on Twitter and social media by searching for David Pustansky. I'll spell my last name just because I know it's a bit tricky, which is Pustansky. And last thing I will say on this episode is, if you like the show, let people know. If there's ideas of skills you'd like to see spoken about or covered in later episodes, then by all means put it in some comments somewhere, email us, contact us through social media. And if you're an improviser out there and you would like to get involved in Extreme Improv, be it for our live shows, be interviewed on our Extreme Improv chat show, or to be a guest speaker on the Extreme Improv Skills Show, then again, get in touch. We'd like to hear from you. Contact details and everything else can be found from www.extremeimprov.co.uk. So for now, this is the Extreme Improv Skills Show. Thank you very much, and bye for now.